Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the executive meeting. Before we start in earnest, I just wanted to remind everybody that this meeting is being webcast. So it will be filmed for live and or subsequent broadcast on the council's website or YouTube channel. The whole of the meeting will be filmed except where there are confidential or exempt items. If you make a representative in the meeting, you will be deemed to have consented to being filmed. By entering the body of the committee room, you're also consenting to being filmed and to the possible use of those images and sound recordings for webcasting. Just to also remind everybody who is taking part in the meeting to put your microphone on when you speak and to also turn it off when you finish speaking. Thank you. Okay, so item number 1 is to note attendances. I have apologies for Councillor Weston and for Councillor Joanne Harding. Does anybody else have any apologies?
Chair?
Sorry, yes.
The other Councillor Evans, I don't know if it's appropriate for shadow execs to, she would send her apologies.
Thank you. And Councillor Anstey? Councillor Anstey, yeah, brilliant. Thank you very much. So item number 2 is questions from members of the public. Now we have received a question from a member of the public who is Mr. Fingland. Mr. Fingland did want to attend the meeting and ask his question. Unfortunately, he has sent some apologies and isn't able to attend. So I propose that I will read out his question, and this will be for Councillor Adshead to answer. So I'll just read out the question. I think some copies have been placed in front of people. So the question is, the survey started, it is a question on item 7 of the agenda, which is the cycling improvement scheme. And I should have mentioned actually that the question can be asked and will be answered, but there will be no follow-up. So the survey started with a mandatory and binary yes/no question. Do you support all of the proposed cycle route improvements which potentially prevented anyone who supported some but not all elements of the proposals from completing the survey? The recommendation in item 2.4 for provision of semi-bound surface treatment for the routes to cater for all users, including equestrians, cyclists and pedestrians, is unlikely to make cycling equal. Members of the Cycle Forum have been clear and consistent throughout. If the objective is to enable as many people as possible to cycle in all seasons, then an unsealed surface would not be suitable. Unsealed surfaces are not durable or easy to cycle on, and it could be argued that reinstating them would be maintenance work rather than appropriate use of a capital investment. The BHS's path surfacing document states that recent successes have occurred using resin-bound rubber crumb to provide a hard surface that can look like tarmac. Is easily used by cycles and wheelchairs, but is also excellent underfoot for pedestrians and riders. This is a surface that the BHS recommends for shared use construction. A meeting between representatives of Trafford Cycle Forum and OTP to consider the proposals in detail did not materialise. The report does not mention the Mayor's Challenge Fund with its potential to provide further investment if required. There is also no mention of any work so far or commitment to requirements to ensure the paths selected for this scheme form useful parts of the proposed B network. Please can you provide reassurances that existing and future inputs from this cycle forum will be considered as the scheme is developed to ensure that any new or upgraded paths will be integral parts of the wider network that attracts people who don't currently cycle in order to achieve best value and support the GMCA Made to Move agenda. Thank you, Councillor Adshead.
Right, thank you. As executive member with responsibilities for the encouragement of all sustainable travel modes in Trafford, including enhancements to the cycle network, I can give assurances that further consultation with the Trafford Cycle Forum and other stakeholders will be undertaken. As members will be aware, a public consultation was held in late 2018 on proposals to improve the walking and cycling network between Sale Water Park and Urmston. This is a joint project between Highways England and Trafford Council. Based on the consultation responses, there was significant support for enhancing and improving the existing networks, and that they are completing aspirations for the various groups: walkers, cyclists, horse riders. The final solution will therefore have to balance these demands. Following on from the public consultation exercise and subject to approval of the report recommendations, the detailed design work of the network improvements will commence. As part of this process, the service treatment will be finalised, and given the feedback from the equine community, the service will have to be suitable for horses, cyclists and walkers. This will include further discussions with key stakeholders, including Manchester City Council, Highways England, Trafford Cycle Forum, TFGM Disability Design Reference Group, and representatives from the equestrian and pedestrian user groups, along with TransPennine Trail officers. We are also looking upon a bid to the Mayor's Challenge Fund to introduce a walking and cycle route from Sale Town Centre to Sale Water Park. This bid will be submitted in tranche 5 of the MCF and will be submitted 3rd of April 2019. The bid, if successful, will connect the Mersey Valley, Urmston to Sale walking and cycle route / Jackson's Boat Bridge, also as part of the bid. This connection between Jackson's Boat Bridge to Hardy Lane, which is within Manchester, will be progressed, thus providing a comprehensive link to the Manchester to Chorlton walking and cycling scheme.
Thank you, Councillor Radzed. Item 3 on the agenda, declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest? Councillor Lloyd.
I'd like to declare in relation to item 6, the homeless strategy, that I am the trustee of Trafford Domestic Abuse Services.
Thank you. Item 4 on the agenda is to receive and approve the minutes from the budget executive meeting and the executive meeting on the 25th of February. Are those minutes seconded? And are they approved? Thank you. And item number 5 on the agenda, matters from, and we have the task and finish report on the One Trafford partnership. Councillor Acton.
Thanks, Chair. You'll see on page 12, it sets out the report from the task and finish group on the One Trafford partnership with Amy contract. And you will see at the back of the report, there's a set of recommendations from the scrutiny committee for the executive to consider. There is also a task and finish report on period poverty, which Sophie Taylor will speak to. And just one final point from me, just to let you know, or the executive know, that the task and finish group has met now with regard to the climate change, met last week. Obviously, it is a big piece of work. And a further meeting will be held on the 11th of April. Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Acton. Councillor Taylor.
Thank you. I think you're all in receipt now of the report around period poverty. This was a piece of work that we did within health scrutiny with the support of our officers and also the Children's and Young Persons Services as well. So we're very thankful to all those people involved for their support with that project, really. And the aims and objectives were piece of work were to identify to what extent period poverty is a problem in the borough, in as much as how much or the extent to which girls and young women are being kept from attending school and education because of lack of access to sanitary protection, and also just to raise the wider issue of menstruation and to destigmatise and raise some discussion around this area. So we've undertaken some work. We took a survey to identify the scale of the problem. I have to say every school in Trafford was contacted, 85 schools within the borough. We didn't get an enormous response rate, and we can only conclusively say that 95 pupils across the borough have been affected by this. But I think we probably need to send our net a little bit wider to maybe sort of reevaluate that. But nevertheless, that is 95 girls and young women who are possibly being prevented from attending school because of this problem. So our recommendations are that we would like to collaborate with a charity that already has established work across the UK called the Red Box Charity, and the way they work is to place their red boxes or red wheelie bins in public places or places such as the town hall, to allow people to donate sanitary protection, and then those products are redistributed and placed in either public places, they could be placed in libraries, or what we would like to see is a red box in every school and educational establishment across the borough, really, so that girls and young women have got access to sanitary products whenever they require them, and they are not barred from attending education because of problems with accessing protection, really. So it expands on a little bit more in the report, but that is the essence of the work that we did, really. And as I say, we had enormous support from Cathy Rooney and she's here tonight, Alex Murray, and also Sarah Grant in undertaking this piece of work. So we're really grateful for the support that we've received with that.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. I think it's an incredibly important piece of work that's happened here, actually, and I'm really grateful for the report that you've brought to executive. I think it's important that we consider all of the recommendations that the report makes. I think for even one child to be prevented from attending school is an absolute indictment, actually. And, I think you're right in what you're saying, that we don't know fully the scale of the problem, but I'm really grateful for you bringing the report. Are there any questions or comments from the executive on the report tonight at all? Yes, Councillor Ball.
Good job on it, and it's about poverty in families, because we know there are single parents with 2 teenage daughters, for example, and the cost every month is high, and they really struggle with that. And to have this support within the schools and available. I know of one school where they had to go to the headmistress, I think, at this particular school to get sanitary protection if their period started during school. That's not acceptable. We have to have it available to every single girl. So I think you've done a really good job, and hopefully we can progress this now.
Councillor Ball, I did forget to add, there are obviously some financial implications associated with the recommendations in this report, the financial implications of setting up and maintaining the Red Box scheme, which we think will be around £2,000 initial cost, and then around £500 every year to maintain that service. And what we were also hoping to do is have a launch event as well to draw attention to the issue, really, that at a possibly Sale Waterside or a fairly prominent location within the borough to highlight the issue, really. So.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. Are there any comments from anybody more widely? Thank you. Sorry, apologies, Councillor Radstead.
There's no problem. do we call you deputy leader? I'm not sure. I've not seen this position before, so that's what I had to do. But yeah, I mean, just to comment on the other report, obviously, which comes under my portfolio there. Is obviously we'll take the report back, and it'll once the officers have had a chance to look at the report, we will report back to scrutiny once we've got the recommendations and the report sorted out. I've not got a date when that will be at this point, of course. We've only just received the report, but that will, of course, be done in due course, and all members will be kept informed. Thank you.
Absolutely. And then the executive will have the recommendations to consider then. Thank you, Councillor Adshead. Okay, so item number 6, Trafford Homelessness Strategy and Draft Action Plan to consider report for the executive member for communities and housing. Thank you, Councillor Proctor.
Thank you, Chair. The Council has a statutory duty to produce a homelessness strategy, and the previous strategy expired in December 18, and the new one, which will run to 2024, has been developed to identify the key priorities and actions required to deliver this by the Council and other stakeholders over the next 5 years. The priorities detailed within the strategy meet the Council's corporate objectives of building quality, affordable and social housing, reducing health inequalities and improving health and well-being, supporting our most vulnerable residents through targeting support. It complements the Trafford Housing Strategy, delivers the priorities set in the emerging GM housing strategy, and meets the requirements of the Homelessness Reduction Act of 2017. Production of the draft strategy has been undertaken in consultation with key stakeholders from the Trafford Homeless Champions Group, the Strategic Housing Partnership and Stronger Communities Board. In addition, specific one-off-to-one discussions have taken place with the Housing Options Service, Trafford Hosts, CCG, One Trafford Response, Children's and Families Directorate and Adult Services. A review of the previous homeless strategy and the homeless service in Trafford Host has been undertaken, and a number of achievements are detailed within the strategy. These are outlined in 3.1 in the report. A review of the homelessness in Trafford, including analysis of the data and an evaluation of the host service, was undertaken as part of the production of this strategy. A number of key findings are detailed in the report, and this has helped us to develop a vision, which is working together to end homelessness in Trafford. The strategic priorities to achieve this are homelessness prevention, improve access to permanent affordable accommodation and supported homes, primarily through the increased supply of social housing, eradication of the use of B&Bs and increase in the provision of good quality temporary accommodation for homeless people in Trafford. Work towards ending rough sleeping in the borough, improve access to employment, education and training for homeless people, and improve health and well-being for homeless people in Trafford. The report identifies a range of actions to deliver this vision and priority. Following completion of the draft strategy, the Council held a 6-week public consultation during December, which posed questions relating to the proposed priorities and actions required to deliver them. A copy of the survey, draft strategy and appendices were available on the Council's website following a press release and are publicly via social media. In total, 260 responses were received to the online survey, with 97 being personal views from residents and elected members. Overall, respondents were very positive about the creation of the strategy, the proposed priorities and actions identified. Respondents felt the priorities were the most important were improve access to permanent affordable accommodation and supported homes, primarily through an increased supply of social housing, working towards ending rough sleeping in Trafford, and improve access to employment, education and training for homeless people in Trafford. After assessing all the consultation responses and suggested additions, the strategy has been amended to include a range of priorities, which are outlined in detail in the report. Following the public consultation, a wide-ranging draft action plan has been produced to identify all proposed actions to meet the strategic priorities of the strategy. The draft action plan provides an indication of timeframes and identifies key deliveries partners for each action. Once approved, the Homelessness Champions Group will adopt the action plan as its delivery plan and will provide a coordination role in terms of delivery, monitoring, progress and performance management. This is a comprehensive and wide-ranging strategy which not only tackles actual homelessness in the borough, but seeks to address the root causes which force some of our most vulnerable residents down this route. And it is in line with government legislation in terms of homeless prevention as the centre of this objective. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Proctor. Are there any questions from members of the executive? Any questions or comments more broadly, please? No? Okay, so the report is for approval. Is it approved? Thank you. Okay, so moving on to item 7, which is Urmston to Sale Water Park Cycle Walking Equestrian Improvement Scheme, and this is a report from the Executive Member for Environment, Air Quality and Climate Change, Councillor Radshead, please.
Thank you, Deputy Leader. The report sets out that the Council has been awarded a grant to improve walking and cycling facilities within the Mersey Valley between Urmston and Sale Water Park. The report also sets out the results of the consultation that has been carried out on the proposals in the autumn of last year. The results of which have been used to develop the proposals as set out in the report, and the consultation summary is shown in Appendix 1. Section 1 sets out the background to the report and notes that the scheme is within the boundaries of both Trafford Council and Manchester Council, and that the value of the grant is some £2,675,000 from Highways England as part of its Cycling Safety and Integration Fund. And the aim of the improvement is to provide more attractive, safe, accessible and integrated facilities linking to the wider network even, that can be seen as an alternative to busy main roads. Another part of the consultation was to ascertain the views of the public of a new bridge at Jackson's Boat and a number of options around that. Section 2 sets out the conclusions and analysis of the consultation, with some 81% in favour, and details of the concerns raised, and sets out how the scheme should be addressed and developed. Section 4 sets out details of the consultation and the information on the existing bridge as at the 21st of January, which you'll now be aware has been awarded Grade 2 listed status, and it is within the boundaries of Manchester, so that remains their responsibility and not Trafford's. Therefore, I move the recommendations as set out on page 1.
Thank you, Councillor Radshead. Are there any questions or comments from the executive at all? No. Yes, Councillor Cordingley.
Thank you, Deputy Leader. Really welcome this report. It's long needed, and I notice the work's been going on this week on an almost neighbouring scheme at Ashton-on-Mersey, where we've been across the Mersey Valley, and I think, you know, I applaud what you're doing.
That please very quickly say, obviously, with the question that was submitted earlier, give you the flavour of those from those extensions. Well, the aim is to create that complete network of it all. So I think that this is just a small part of it, but it's actually a very necessary part of upgrading work. One minor thing I'd like to add to that as well is that when Manchester did something similar a few years ago, they did a lot of improvement work at lower level, and come heavy rains during the winter, it washed a lot of it away. So the aim of this is to put the improvements at a higher level, so come the bad winter, it won't wash away, so it's more sustainable and actually make it more accessible in the longer term.
Yes, thank you. I think that's a really important point, and I echo Councillor Cordingley's comments. Are there any comments or questions more broadly? Councillor Coggins, please.
Thank you. Yeah, I was going to ask some questions actually, which I think Mr. Fingland has anticipated, about the surface and the level of compromise that we get to when we've got to accommodate pedestrians and cyclists and horse riders. So yeah, I'll follow closely what happens there. But yes, obviously, like Councillor Cordingley said, you know, welcome a lot of this. I do worry that we conflate leisure cycling with or that we spend about spending money on leisure cycling when we have such a desperate need to spend money on commuting cycling that would provide the leisure options when we needed them, but also have huge other economic and health and well-being impacts. So I don't know if you have any comment on that, and could this money have been better spent in providing genuinely segregated spaces that would actually increase the uptake of cycling amongst groups who don't currently use it. And also just a quick question about the Turn Moss link, and if there is any update on that, or if there's any costings or anything available. Thank you.
Councillor
Just
Radstead.
briefly saying, obviously Highways England have funded this in that sense, so it is seen in light of that. But the report, obviously, I accept what you're saying about some of it, but this isn't to do when you talk about segregation. So this is actually not really about highways. It's to take people off the highway into alternative routes. So in that case, I mean, part of the during the consultation, there was some concerns from some groups and organisations who were concerned about sharing pedestrians, particularly sharing it with cyclists and perhaps even horse riding as well. But obviously in such a narrow stretch that we got very limited, and we hope that all users will actually really be responsible, and obviously I think above all that pedestrians should have really top priority, and they should be, so whether it's somebody riding horse side, they should be mindful that pedestrians also have a right there. So it's getting that combination. I think if problems do develop, I think obviously it's something we have to look at further, but the schemes themselves around the Transparent Trail and others have been working for many years, and I've not come across too many problems in that sense of it. So I mean, I don't see the need for segregation on this particular section, although obviously that's more relating to more on like public type roads, etc. So I think the money was specifically for this, not for highway scheme. It was actually more related to the scheme for the Mersey Valley, which is itself an alternative route in that sense of it to busy roads. So I don't know if that answers some of your points there, but it's something that we certainly can see all sides of it in that sense. But obviously it is designed, obviously Transparent Trail was designed as leisure route for all users as well. But obviously this is upgrading it, and I just hope that they can't segregate that really, I don't think. But I will take assurance back to say that should problems develop, it's something that we will be looking at quite seriously.
Thank you, Councillor Radstead. Can I bring in Richard, please, as well?
Yeah, just to clarify, I don't think we necessarily separate out leisure cycling from commuter cycling. So, for example, we've invested previously a lot in upgrading canal towpaths. Could often be seen that as being as leisure cycling, but actually we know the canal towpaths in the borough are used a lot for commuter cycling, if only for staff coming to the town hall here, but also into Manchester. In terms of Turn Moss, we don't have a funding pot identified at the moment. We haven't done costings, but we have noted is that is something that we do want to do, and we've also discussed with Friends of Turn Moss, and that's something that they're very supportive of as well.
Thank you. Any further questions? Yes, Councillor Evans.
Just a question, only because it's appropriate. How much of the 150 million have we bid for from GM for things like this? Are we on with that? Are we well on with that?
This isn't to do with the Mayor's Challenge Fund. This is to do with Highways England grant. So that's entirely a separate report. And obviously, so we are working on that. And this tranche of bids will be going through next month as well. As you probably saw from the earlier question, we're looking at quite a few people who seem to confuse this with the Mayor's Challenge Fund, but it's actually funded from Highways England. But I take your point.
Thank you. So the recommendations are on page 1 of the report. Are they approved? Thank you. Okay, so item 8 of the agenda is the Greater Manchester Clean Air Plan, which is a report again from the Executive Member for Environment, Air Quality and Climate Change. Before we move into that, I just wanted to make clear that this is the preliminary plan, which will be going out to consultation. The business case will be brought to council for council approval once that is done. Councillor Radstead.
Thank you, Deputy Leader. You will all be aware of the proposed Greater Manchester Clean Air Plan and the levels of pollution that is driving this. Nitrogen dioxide exceeds permitted levels across numerous sites around Greater Manchester, including here in Trafford. Diesel vehicles are responsible for some 80% of the pollutant and is responsible for major health concerns, affecting especially the youngest and the eldest in our communities. And estimates suggest that the pollution contributes to the equivalent of some 1,200 deaths across Greater Manchester, as well as major health concerns such as COPD and asthma. The proposals in the report before us sets out how we can tackle this and bring down levels of nitrogen dioxide in the shortest possible time. The report is about public health first and foremost, and we need to work with all agencies and partners to both understand its importance and to help with its implementation. The strategy, modelling and work has been carried out in conjunction with TFGM, with colleagues and officers from around Greater Manchester. Clearly, we need a strategy that deals with nitrogen dioxide across GM rather than working as single boroughs in isolation, as a joint strategy will deal more effectively with the problem and help bring down levels faster, as well as in line with the requirements of the legislation. The report before is comprehensive, and the recommendations are set out on pages 1 and 2, which also sets out some of the accompanying documents that will accompany the outline business case, some 28 in total. Whilst I won't go through the documents in detail here, as everyone will have read it and be familiar with it, I would like to draw your attention to a few of the issues set out in the report. Section 3 covers air quality and health concerns, as I referred to a moment ago. Section 5 sets out the government's position and how they were taken to court on 3 occasions and have now passed this on to local government to deal with. And this also lists details of the issues and problems around Greater Manchester. Section 8 sets out the strategic outline case, while sections 9, 10 and 11 set out in great detail the modelling that has been undertaken of the various options and why some have been ruled out. This is one of the most important parts of the report, as it sets out clearly why option 8 has been recommended against others, and how this option not only brings compliance in the shortest possible time, but also performs better in terms of secondary factors such as socio-economic impact and value for money. This is because this option does not apply a clean air zone to private cars. It's important to note that help and support from government that must be forthcoming for this strategy to be implemented. We will further note that Trafford, along with Wigan, will be amongst the first to reach compliance in 2021 under these proposals, along with it even a reduction in particulate matter. Section 14 sets out the Clean Vehicle Fund and how we can actually use this to support buses, taxis and small businesses to compliance. Clearly, a huge task in itself. Section 16 covers the next steps, including to full business case that the Deputy Leader outlined at the beginning, and very importantly, the public consultation exercise that is proposed for the first 6 to 8 weeks in the early part of the summer. Before finishing, I would like to add that this report may be seen by some as working in isolation to wider issues and problems. This clearly is not the case, we can assure you. Take tonight's agenda, for instance, as well as dealing with this pollution strategy, we're also dealing with safety around schools, which is the next item, and there are many issues contained within that report itself. Further, we're through to Urmston and Chalton, and it's also used as an alternative to busy roads. In addition to this, we have the scrutiny task and finish group looking at carbon neutrality. So there's clearly a lot going on across the whole piece. And with that, Deputy Leader, I will move the report and the recommendations as set out.
Thank you, Councillor Radshead. I think that's a really important point, that this is one of a range of measures, really. It's not intended to be the only measure in terms of clean air, but I think the case for change has well and truly been made by public health. Are there any comments from the executive? Councillor Lloyd, please.
Well, as the executive member for health and wellbeing, I really welcome the start of the process, because obviously it's of a great deal of interest, particularly for our residents. And I'm thinking of children as well, because during 2017 and 18, There were 107 asthma emergency admissions for Trafford residents under the age of 19. And of course, children are particularly susceptible. And also that admission rates are higher in areas of deprivation and across England than they are in other areas. The Met Office does issue warnings of poor air quality, which is obviously something that's really important. And given that I've got children that do have asthma, I always look at those because I don't want them out on those days. Air pollution causes more extra deaths a year than tobacco smoking, and as many as 64,000 lives are lost in Britain each year due to the toxic smog, and it cuts life expectancy in the UK by an average of 1.5 years. So it's a huge issue, and it's one that it's good that we are able to tackle. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any comments more widely? Comments or questions? Yes, Councillor Potts.
Yeah, just a quick one. In this one, the recommendation at the end says delegating to the corporate director place approval of submission of supplementary information. I'm just wondering what kind of information, or I mean, if there's something that comes in that's possibly a bit concerning, then is that still under delegated authority then?
Richard?
It will be non-substantive information. It's just obviously there's a huge amount of documentation attached with this report. It's quite easy for some small elements of that to be required to change. The plan is going through all 10 GM authorities over the course of last week, this week, in advance of the 31st of March. So it's just if there are any minor changes that need to be made to that to the documentation, and approval to me to do that, rather than having to bring the whole thing back through executive. So it's a fairly standard, and anything substantive change will be reported to the executive.
Thank you.
Any further comments, Councillor Coggins?
Thank you. Yeah, I broadly welcome this one as well, and I appreciate the words of Councillor Adsett and Councillor Hines that this isn't in a vacuum, and that there are other things going on to help with this problem as well. I do think that it's a lost opportunity though, and I want to particularly talk about a few things on page 53 of the longer version, or page 21 if you're looking at the individual one. So in 11.7, it rules out charging for all polluting vehicles. I do think, given what we've heard from Councillor Lloyd about the damage that air pollution is doing, especially to the most vulnerable, to children and older people, how we can justify not charging for all polluting vehicles. I see that it does say that that by doing this, we won't bring forward compliance. And we've got to see the compliance here is 2024. So we're accepting that children and adults in Trafford are going to be breathing this illegal air for the next 5 years. But even if it doesn't bring forward compliance, it would, of course, have huge impacts on the other types of air pollution, because this is not talking about particulate matter. And by replacing these diesel cars with electric, we're not going to be reducing the particulate matter at all. So that's a huge issue. And it would also have huge impacts on, of course, our climate change obligations, and also on road safety. So that's one question. Yes, I can see that it's not going to bring forward our absolute legal minimum, but it would have huge impact. I pause.
Does Councillor Adsett or Richard, do you want to answer that question?
Start on that anyway.
Okay, thank you.
I mean, obviously, we're talking about a CASD scheme there. Obviously, as you indicate, for one, it doesn't bring compliance any quicker in that sense of it. But also, if you read through other parts of the report, it does set out, for instance, that cars, unlike other vehicles, are not used 90% of the time. So whilst there may be more of them, in that sense of it, they used a lot less. I think, I mean, I've just been away for a week. My car's sat on there for 8 days without being used. And I think whereas a bus, a lorry, HGV, vans, taxis, they can use up to a lot longer, 16 hours a day. And in cases of HGVs and buses, they've obviously got much bigger engines and they're used consistently throughout. So I think that's one of the points there that really does stand out in that sense. Whereas a car might be used half an hour a day. In that sense, it doesn't undermine that. It doesn't. But obviously, there are other issues as well, in particularly poorest communities. But obviously, socio-economic impact on that one. And obviously, it's something that obviously we'll be looking at further in that sense, how we can work with those communities. And this is actually, of course, just really for consultation at this stage. So there's obviously a public consultation is going out. Well, there's two sets of consultation going to happen. There's a sort of discussion how we can actually consult with the public, and that'll be done over the next few months. So far from actually seen as the final report in that sense, this will actually be, I believe the final report as things stand will be towards the end of the year. But there's certainly a lot more opportunities for people to actually input those sorts of questions into it. But I certainly do not undermine anything you say there. That's reasonably valid. But obviously, there's a lot of things to be factored into account there. And I think we have to have the scheme that's right. If we go too far on one hand, it can be seen as heavy-handed. And first and foremost, this is about public health. And we don't want it to be not misunderstood and simply saying when we can bring in a scheme that will bring nitrogen dioxide levels down below, and we can be compliant by 2021 here in Trafford, then we unnecessarily introduce an extra level to that might be seen by some people as simply more of a congestion charge. Whereas what we want this to be seen about public health first, foremost, and nothing else. If people start confusing it with other things, then we lose that message. I think the important message is this is public health, and we have to all times ensure the public see that, understand that, and actually make sure that gets through. And that's the message that I'm sure we all want to get through. So that's particularly come through in that respect. I don't know if Richard wants to add anything to that.
Thank you. Councillor Coggins, can I just check, only in the interest of time and for the agenda, how many questions you might have on this? Yes, do go ahead.
I'll be brief. Obviously, the particulate matter and road safety issues are public health issues, so that's something. But the second question was about those economic impacts, and on 11.11 on page 53 again, excuse me, it talks about the unintended consequences of just it talks about the impacts of I suppose low-income car owners. However, what we know is that the poorest people don't have cars at all, and also the poorest people are likely to be worst affected by air pollution, and including particulate matter, which this isn't tackling. So I suppose just questioning that justification. I kicking myself that I don't have the statistic, but I think it's about 1/3 of people in Greater Manchester don't have access to a car, but I don't have the exact statistic in front of me. So I suppose just questioning whether there is a genuine inequality impact there. Thanks.
Well, I just make a couple of quick points there. I mean, first of all, I do know a lot of poorer people who actually need a car. So I don't think it's the case that all poor people don't have a car. But at that point in Trafford has a much higher ownership than, say, for instance, parts of Manchester in that sense of it. But certainly, and a lot of people from deprivation, they actually need it because they don't have proper public transport. And that's part of the problem that we've got. And that's leads on to the other reports, which we sort of mentioned earlier. One of the things that we have to look at, although we have to look at this report in isolation, in terms because we're required to bring down levels in line with government legislation, it doesn't mean we aren't looking at the matter. And I sit on obviously Transport for Greater Manchester, and we're very keen to sort of make transport much more 24-hour, make it affordable, and there are issues you raise there. But until we can get to that sort of level, obviously people will continue and need cars. Some people can't do without cars, in that sense. I think the way society has gone, it's there probably are a lot of too many cars in some cases, but everything is moved that people have to have cars to access things. So one of the other perspective I've been pushing for a long time as well, and obviously I'm not going to get anywhere directly, is actually what we should be doing is actually making things much more local for people so they don't necessarily have to use cars for things as well, in that sense of it. But in particular, on particulate matter, obviously seeing that whilst it's not directly part of this report in itself and part of the legislation, that all the requirements take into account particulate matter. So if the government does change the guidelines on that one, it'll actually be able to automatically be particulate matter will be accounted for in it. And of course, when we bring down levels of nitrogen dioxide, it will also bring down those levels of particulate matter as well at the same time, in that sense of it, from vehicle pollution, in that sense of it. Because obviously diesel cars do put out particulate matter. So the more we reduce diesel vehicles altogether, the more it will bring that particulate matter down in line with that as well. So I don't know if Richard wants to add anything.
Thank you. Any more questions? Sorry, Councillor Cordingley and then Councillor Evans.
One thing I wanted to just stress is my disappointment with the government. in the sense that they're leaving it all down to local authorities. Our biggest polluter is the M60, and the highways are doing insufficient. Highways England are not part of this, and this, to me, that's a disappointment. We'll do our best, but we need that help from central government, and they need to pull up a little bit more as well.
Just answer that. We're going to have I mean, I fully agree with everything that Councillor Cordingley said there. I mean, indeed, at the meetings I've attended and discussions I've had with our officers here, it's quite clear we're sharing a lot of frustration with both highways England there, because obviously M60, if you look at the corridors of pollution on the mapping system, it's a lot of it is correlated directly with the M60. Yeah, they're actually saying to us, we got to deal with it, but they won't deal with the motorways themselves, and that in part in itself is actually a bit of a contradiction, because what we wouldn't want to happen is for those vehicles to come off the motorway. But it's something that we have mentioned to JACU, that's a joint air quality unit, who are actually doing this with us. So it's something that we had discussions with them. We know that Andy Burnham and Alex from Stockport, they've actually had discussions as well as senior TFG officers, and it's something one of the responses I saw from it, they acknowledged it's a problem, the department, but obviously how far it's going to get down the road, I'm not 100% certain yet, but it's something that is mentioned in the reports on there, and it's something that we're going to stay on top of the agenda of it, and I think it's something that the government should rightly bring to order, because it is something of a really big concern that we'll do an air bit to bring down levels in our communities, but simply they're not taking any responsibility for the levels of nitrogen dioxide of the motorway, which in some cases it won't be local roads, it will be the motorway that's doing that one. I also very much take your point, particularly about the government passing this on. I didn't want to say too much more in my introduction there, because obviously I spoke quite at length on that one there, but it's something that is frustration to that, because the government was taken to court 3 occasions on this, and each time more local authorities put into it, but at the same time, rather than say to the local authority, let's work together to do this, simply pushing it onto us was not entirely the best way forward. I think that's reflected in some of the recommendations and the report there, and it's something that we certainly take on board there, and it's something that obviously will form part of the process as it goes on.
Thank you, Chair. But the 3 that appear to be making the running are option 5, 1 and 2, and option 8. I'd like to get the pitch in early, really, to get LGVs taken out of this. I think we're talking about social impact on our poorest. Obviously, fleet operators will just pass this on, bus operators that go on your bus fares, big HGVs that will go on your per pallet, etc. But the LGVs, predominantly your one-man bands, are going to be disproportionate. If you're self-employed, you're on your own, you're a decorator, you're a plumber, all that sort of stuff, it's going to disproportionately affect you. So I would make the pitch at this point early that really they need, because they're our backbone. You start impacting upon them. It's been rumoured at £7.50 a day or something like that. So it's a big hit. That's going to go straight on. It's not in the report. That's rumour, I have to say. So my pitch is the LGVs. I think that's impacting our self-employed lowest earners disproportionately to everybody else. Thank you.
Councillor Radford.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, fully accept point on that one. That is the white vans, as we call them, that are the backbone of our community, and it's something that we've actually had a lot of discussions around. And obviously, we're hoping that we can work with those. We've had some discussions, obviously, with at local level with the taxis and so forth, and at the higher level, there've been discussions going with the freight companies who have got much less of a problem. But as this develops, we want to get much more work done with those local businesses at the moment, because this has been such a long time getting to this level, and we've been sort of driven by a government timetable that's actually kept us pushing modern, so it's hard to get to that level. But this is the outline business case now, so this isn't the end of the process. We're actually really at the beginning of the process as far as the public concerns. So it's something that we're very concerned about. I mean, when we talked in there about socio-economic impact, we weren't just talking about individuals which have agenda, and obviously we want to work very closely to actually get this problem sorted out. And it's something that obviously I'm sure that you and others will be putting in once we have the consultation that's due to come up in the early part of the summer. It's something that's very much on our agenda. We want to help and support them, give them all the help and support that we actually can, because obviously, as you indicate, they are very important to our community in that sense of it. But obviously, it is a requirement of government that we actually do bring in this legislation to comply with this. So it's something we've got to do. But obviously, we've applied for grants, and we'll actually be doing all the measures that we can during this process. I'll assure you that if we can do more, please do get in touch with us, because we'll happily discuss this with yourselves and others over that coming period.
Thank you. Okay, is that everybody? Okay, so the recommendations are on pages 1 and 2 of the report. Are they approved? Thank you. So moving on to item 9, which is safety around schools, to consider the report for the executive member for environment, air quality and climate change. Councillor Ants.
Take a mouthful of water first, please.
Take it for that.
Absolutely, yeah. Thank you, Deputy Leader. I think a much shorter report here, and one that I think we can all actually all support, I hope. Yeah. By way of introduction and some background to the report, I set up this working group to bring together the various departments to look at all the different aspects of safety, particularly around our primary schools, recognising that no one service could do this alone. The police have now also shown an interest, and we're going to be inviting them to future meetings. So as well as officers from highways and education, we also have public health, regulated services to look after idle engines and parking enforcement. And from the exec side, there's myself, Councillor Bolt and Councillor Judy Floyd. So I think between us all, it's quite a big committee. And we've actually been doing a tremendous amount of good work there. And I set out in the report. But however, just to concentrate on the report itself, I'm conscious of time, the report before us sets out some of the work today, but this should be very much seen as a sort of work in progress. One of the things the working group were all agreed upon was that we felt we had really benefited from working together, and that committee, that working group, should actually very much continue over the coming period. Section 1 of the report sets out the background, as well as highlighting some of the concerns and problems and some of the outcomes we're actually looking for. Section 2 sets out some of the current initiatives, like the WELL project, mentioned in point 2.1 and 2.2, which is TFGM funded and rewards children for their efforts into walking to school with rewards of badges and the like. And I believe how it works, in addition to that, they actually have wall charts in the classroom, and the more walking they do, the more it gets in there. So you get like a bit of competition between the youngsters, actually, who can do the most walking, which then leads them to call their mummy or daddy to take them to school by walking rather than walking, so they can get more rewards and beat the other kids in the class. So it's that sort of initiative that actually low-level intervention that actually works quite well. In addition to that, we got children who actually give out like fake fines at some schools, and it's that sort of good practice we actually really want to encourage, and it's actually how we can actually get them involved in that one. Just to mention on the WOW project as well, obviously in the report it does say we're currently doing 6 and we're looking to expand that to 12 now, so that's actually should be really good. Sections 2.3 to 2.6 set out potential funding for the Mayor's Challenge Fund as part of the Active Neighbourhood Fund, which you'll see there. That's our proposal for the proposed parking scheme. So only residents living there will be able to park there, and others will not be able to stop there and drop their children off from there. Section 3 sets out the benefits from this strategy, some 15 in total, including reducing obesity, to refresh travel plans for schools. Section 4 outlines the next steps, including the work around idling engines that we see as very important, and a further report will be brought back to Executive in September, which further details of the proposals and actions and the costings. I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank our officers for the work they put into this and helping to bring this report there this evening. I'd like to move the report there. The recommendations I set in the report, and then my colleague Jane Bow would obviously like to comment much more from the education side as well, and I'll take a rest for a minute.
Thank you, Councillor Adshead. Councillor Bow.
Well, I want to thank Councillor Adshead and the team of officers that have been working on this. This has been an issue that we all know has been on for a long time, since my children were going to school, and that's a long time ago. It's all about parents behaving irresponsibly. And that is the message we have to get out loud and clear. Keep moving, don't stop here. And what did we see? Parents still parking, opening the door, pushing their kids out, and with the engines running. So if you really care about your child's health and well-being, you will not do this. And it's only a small proportion of parents that do it at every school. And there's been various ways that schools have dealt with this, because I've talked to many of them. One of the most successful has been where the children themselves wear high-vis yellow jackets, stand on the pavement outside the school, as the car pulls up, they point their finger and they give them a ticket that they've written themselves to say, do you realise what you're doing to our health? And the parents look shamed and drive off. That has worked, but it needs to be ongoing, because as soon as they stop, they come back again. It's getting that message over that you just cannot behave like this. It's wrong. And one day there will be a real serious accident. And as you say, the asthma is all increasing around our schools. So we have got head teachers looking at different ways of coping with this. And it's really on the agenda. And we've also asked the Governors Forum to bring this onto the Governor's agenda, to get the agenda there at schools, that they're all sitting around discussing what are we going to do about this. And we will do as much as we can to support them. But at the end of the day, it absolutely appalls me that parents can behave like this outside our schools. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Ball. Couldn't agree more. Councillor Lloyd?
Well, again, I'd just like to congratulate the executive member for this report. I think I agree, everywhere it is a problem, and I do think we need to tackle it as urgently as possible and try and get some more schools involved as well. Thank you.
Any more comments from members of the executive? And more broadly, please? No. Thank you. So the recommendations are for noting, and they're on page 1 of the report. Are they noted? Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to give Councillor Adshead just a very brief break from proceedings and look to item number 10, which is the Transformation Fund. The repurpose of the funding, and that's to consider reports of the Executive Member for Health and Wellbeing and the Corporate Director of Commissioning. Councillor Lloyd, please.
Thank you, Deputy Leader. This is a key decision for the Executive, as transformation money was to establish a primary care organisation. An independent review was conducted and a recommendation agreed at a CCG governing body that this would be halted. As a result, the resources need to be profiled, and this will be to support the development of primary care in the 4 neighbourhoods, which will support place-based programmes of integrated health and social care. A primary care strategy is being developed to enable the transformational change to take place. The reprofile or repurposing is 2.3 million, and as well as the 4 neighbourhoods, it will go into the local care alliance and programme management to enable that to be able to be done. The reprofiling is agreed with all the practices, the CCG and Greater Manchester, and the recommendation is set out on page 1 of the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lloyd. Any comments at all from the executive? No. And more broadly, please. Yes, Councillor Lamb.
Thank you, Deputy Leader. I've got 4 main sort of points, if I may. Well, 4 questions. The first one is around. I mean, if we read the report, I think, you know, reading between the lines, and you don't have to read too hard between the lines to see that GPs appeared not to be on board and not too happy with original proposals. So my question is, and I know that the CCG have asked for a more meaningful engagement is probably the language I would use. So I suppose the question is, you know, given that GP practices are run almost as independent sort of businesses, can we be sure that they're going to get on board with this? Because if they don't, then that leads me probably to my second point. If we look at the appendix, you know, does this mean we've got £500,000 worth of abortive costs here? So clearly we would not want to see that repeated. The 22 million is a one-off sum of money which is being eroded, and it was meant to transform the services, which leads me to my third point, and that's, and I don't want to dwell on this one too much, but there's £250,000 in there of program management costs. So clearly we'd need to know a little bit more about that, perhaps, in terms of why is that necessary. But finally, my fourth point, I notice in the, which is not directly related to my main point about, the engagement of GPs, but it's in the appendix. We've got a sum of £1.7 million for managing demand in children's services. And I think my question is, given that money is from that £22 million, which is about transforming the services, just a bit more information, please, about, is that to do with, what I call the revenue implications of running children's services, or is it about transformation of children's services? So just confirmation of that point, please. Thank you, Deputy Leader.
Thank you. Sarah, did you want to come in there?
I'll answer them, Councillor. So in terms of the engagement process, all 32 practices were involved in the actual independent review. So not only did general practice in form of the local medical committee sit on the steering group when we did the evaluation, 32 practices were also engaged in taking that evaluation forward in terms of, as you said, did they think it was fit for purpose? Did they think it was actually would improve health outcomes in the future? Was it about them working together? So that's about how we then took the decision as part of the review to pause and then stop. In terms of engagement in the future, part of the recommendation was to ensure that the CCG total rebooted its engagement process and did it much, much better than it had in the past. So we're doing that in twofold, really, going through each neighbourhood. So actually going very much down to place-based level in the 32 practices. So how do people work together in terms of their place? Parts of the new national contract is for networking. So parts of the contract is also about practices working together in terms of how they do things differently. Each network will have a clinical director, which they will sort of work with, and we'll be looking at neighbourhood leads as well. So the whole process in the future will have to be sort of bottom up. And we've also changed the governance of the body itself. So general practice is now represented in those neighbourhoods and is representing people working together on the governing body as well. So the whole primary care strategy is basically on bottom up engagement for the future. Obviously, the proof is in the proof of the pie is in the eating. So we need to sort of make sure that that carries on. But in terms of doing that, all the primary care strategy has been out in neighbourhoods. There's been meetings in neighbourhoods. It's been based on JSNA in terms of how we will look at things in the future. And then it's come back up through council of members. So there is a defined process now in terms of doing that. So I think that answers probably question 1 and 2 in terms of doing question 1. In terms of the programme management, that's very much not only in terms of looking at that whole neighbourhood approach, but also the integration of health and social care on the ground and those networks for the future. So our whole community transition programme in terms of making sustainable change and linking that with primary care itself in terms of local care organisation, but also linking to the wider system change that we've got across all partners in the Local Care Alliance. So that will be very much a time-limited piece of work and able to put sustainability in place for that transformation for that. And then in terms of demand management, it is all about transformation. So it's very much in terms of the 10-year plan and what we'll be looking at, not only with children's, but with adults as well, about the whole transformation of outpatients, diagnostics, urgent care and planned care. So one of the things that we really want to do is to look at how that is developed from a public health route. So it's not just about changing demand now, it's about changing behaviour, changing the way people see themselves, looking at social movements within those neighbourhoods, looking at community assets. So I know we do what is called people-centred care in terms of all the things that Diane and others have been leading on in Trafford Talks, the whole community asset. So demand management will be back into neighbourhoods, and we'll be working with Manchester Foundation Trust particularly on doing that, because obviously it being made up not only of Manchester Royal Infirmary, which is the major flow into the north, but with Ensure major flow and RMCH in terms of that as well.
Thank you, Sarah. It's incredibly helpful. Any further questions?
Sorry, Deputy Leader, if I may,
Sorry,
there's just one aspect that wasn't picked up.
briefly.
And, that was the, yes. So in that realignment of the cost, do we have any abortive costs? It looked like there was £500,000 in there.
So in terms of aborted costs, there's some costs that were used in terms of organisational form setup, which were costs which have been used and we have stopped. So I suppose one of the issues is we would have carried on using those costs or more costs, and we're not going to do that. There was quite a lot of learning from that, which we've kept on in terms of how general practice might work together, what the sort of governance may be, etc. But they are costs which we have now stopped. So it is lessons learned from those costs rather than taking that model, which was an organisational form, and carrying that on.
Thank you. Any further comments? Thank you. So the recommendations are as laid out on page 1 of the report. Are they approved? Thank you. So moving back to Councillor Radshead. This is item number 11, the electricity supply for street lighting and council properties. Just before I hand over to Councillor Radshead, just needed to note really that the intention in this report is that the decision is to be urgent and not subject to call-in. And that intention is actually set out in the narrative at the end of the report. But I would just like to add in an additional recommendation, if I may, Councillor Radshead, that this decision is to be considered urgent for the reasons set out in the report and not subject to call-in, if that's okay. And now just handing over to you, Councillor Radshead.
Thank you, Deputy Leader. My last report of the night. And a very straightforward one, hopefully. Anyway, yes, the report is just looking at our energy supplier for street lighting and council buildings with a new contract as outlined in the report. The current contract with Yorkshire Power is due to expire on the 31st of March, and a proposed new contract with our existing supplier on the 1st of April with potential £48,000 savings, and it will also help keep costs in line with projected costs and budgets, and will further mitigate against increased costs in energy. Section 1 of the background sets out the background with the procurement process through STAR, which commenced in the autumn, and the current state of the energy markets is set out in Section 2. Section 3 sets out the procurement process with STAR at 3.1 and the potential £48K savings as set out in 3.2, and 3.4 sets out the caveats which were attached to that. Section 6 indicates the urgency of the decision, which you referred to a moment ago, Deputy Leader, and the decision and the consequences of not reaching a decision today. Therefore, I set out the recommendations as on page 1 with the addition that you proposed a moment ago. And with that, I will await any questions.
Thank you, Councillor Radshead. I should have also mentioned, actually, there is a bit of a typo in the report, which does mention that there will be a part 2 of this report. There isn't a part 2 of this report. This is the report as moved. Are there any comments or questions from the executive at all? No, thank you. And more broadly? No? Thank you very much. And are the recommendations as set out with the additional recommendation approved? Thank you very much, and thank you, Councillor Radshead, for all your contributions this evening. And now it's my turn, actually. This is item 12, I think, on the agenda, which is the corporate plan. I'm really very pleased to bring the corporate plan to the executive this evening. This plan details the council's vision. The heart of our vision is a common cause, you know, a fantastic borough and a great place to live, but we want to make it an even better place to live, a place where everyone has a chance to succeed and where everybody has a voice. We know we need to do things differently, as the council can't actually do it all. Since 2010, the government has reduced the funding for local government, which equates to a loss of 28.6% in real terms, reduction in funding, alongside which authorities are dealing with a growth in demand for key services, most notably adults and children's social care. And this demand is expected to continue to grow. This has meant the total value of the budget gap since 2010 is £185.7 million. And there's a further forecast gap for the next 3 years of £45.88 million, of which £13.44 million relates to this coming year, 1920. And clearly this brings great pressure to the council. So we feel that it is incredibly important when setting our budgets to pay close attention to the corporate plan, which will help to deliver the council's vision, which is a vision of working together to build the best future for all our communities and everybody in Trafford. The council has identified 7 strategic priorities that are crucial in enabling Trafford residents, businesses and staff to thrive. They are set out in the report with, with some additional kind of information about each of them. But the headlines here really on the 7 priorities are building quality, affordable and social housing, health and well-being, successful and thriving places, children and young people, pride in our area, green and connected, and targeted support. In developing these priorities, the executive sought feedback from partners and residents through a series of events. Over a period of 6 months, there have been opportunities for staff, partners and members to contribute as the corporate plan evolved. The corporate plan describes how these priorities will be delivered, ensuring that staff, partners and residents understand the actions required for the council. The plan will help the council to monitor performance over the next 3 years. There is a high-level plan on a page which contains the priority actions and targets to be delivered over the coming 3 years. And then below this, it sets out the detail relating to each of the priorities. Alongside the development of the plan, the council's values have been revisited, as the values of the council are seen to be absolutely vital in the delivery of the corporate plan. The values identified have been developed through input from staff, and they will be key both internally for staff and externally looking outwards to the delivery of the plan. The values that have been identified are: we empower, we are people-centred, we are inclusive, and we collaborate. And further details of these can be found in the plan. Our vision for Trafford is about giving people a greater choice about where they live, to build and sustain in thriving communities, and to develop areas which we can all take pride in. Our vision is about people living healthily, receiving care when they need it, and having access to our green spaces. It's also about making Trafford a great place to live and work through connected transport links, so that there is a real choice of how we travel in and around our borough. Far too many people are still getting left behind. Too many people's lives are still blighted by not having access to good housing and employment opportunities, by child poverty and health inequalities. Our vision is a call for fairness for all children and young people to have a fair start, no matter their circumstances, and to ensure people get support when they need it. Over the next few years, the vision will be at the forefront of everything the council does and aims to achieve. As I say, the report sets out how all of that will hopefully be achieved, and there are recommendations. However, the corporate plan and values for the council will be also brought to council on Wednesday. So I shall open that up to members of the executive. Are there any questions or comments? Councillor Cordingley, please.
I just want to say how refreshing this corporate plan is, and how much it alters the perception of the council from something that's just been shutting Sure Starts and libraries for the last 10 years or so. We've now got objectives that really meet people's needs, and I just think it's so much more refreshing than what we've had over the last 10 years.
Thank you, Councillor Cordingley. Any further comments or questions from the executive? And more broadly, Councillor Myers, please.
Yes, thank you, Deputy Leader. We've got a number of concerns about the plan as set out in the on the pages in front of us tonight, but rather than discuss them here, we'll bring them to the full council on Wednesday. Thank you. Okay, thank you, Councillor Myers. Okay, and no further comments on that? Okay, and I haven't had any notifications. Oh, just to say, are the recommendations in the report noted and approved? Thank you. So I haven't had any notifications of any urgent business. Oh, sorry, budget monitoring, do apologise. Yes, so, sorry, Councillor Cordingley. And over to
That's
you
all
for
right,
budget
Deputy
monitoring.
Leader. I was almost out the door there.
Councillor Cordingley. Thank you.
I'm pleased to present the period 10 budget monitoring report for noting of the current position and of the capital programme. Based on the budget monitoring for the 10 months to January 19, the year-end forecast outturn is 1.25 million below budget, a favourable movement of 1.22 million since the last monitoring report, due, amongst other things, to the release of contingency items and the impact of de-escalation of costs within children's services, as well as net income generated from the investment strategy. Well, this is an improved position from what we inherited when I first reported to the executive in the summer, and we do owe a debt of thanks to staff at all grades for getting us to where we are now. There remains ongoing pressures that will continue into future years. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cordingley. I think that's a really, really important point. Are there any questions or comments from the executive? Councillor Ball, please.
To our direct schools grant, and I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, and I would also like to add my thanks to everybody involved in bringing the budget in. Any further questions from the executive? And more broadly, please, Councillor Myers and then Councillor Wetton. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Deputy Leader. On page 90, there's a note at the bottom, a footnote on the bottom, saying that minor budget environments have been undertaken since the period 8 report. But I've looked in this report and I can't see the quantum of those. So could the executive member help me with that, please?
We haven't got the detail. We'll get back to you on that environments.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wetton.
Just wanted to ask on page 98 in the business rates section, paragraph 12, it sort of swings both ways, that paragraph. It is still anticipated that the overall budget will be achieved. However, there remains significant volatility in the rating system as a result of, etc., etc. So I just wondered, how categoric is that statement? Is it likely that the overall budget will be achieved, or are there some major concerns, issues? And can I just ask, is it really so significant about building demolitions? Has there been so much demolition that it's affecting incomes? And just a final general question. We've heard about contingency being released as it's likely to happen at this, late on in the year. Is there more contingency being released in these final 2 months?
Thank you, Councillor Wetton. I'll answer them in the. I think I've forgotten the first part. By business rates volatility. Okay, so you mentioned around the demolitions. The demolitions. What they're doing is they're creating a temporary reduction in the quantum of business rates. So when a large building is demolished or taken off the ratings list because it's undergoing a major refurbishment, that actually causes a temporary drop. And some buildings, some of the very large buildings, do have business rateable values that bring in sort of £500,000 or more in one building. The reduction, whilst it looks in the year like it's sort of a where things are being demolished or they're being taken off the ratings list, it's actually an indication of future growth, because these buildings are being demolished so that something else can be built on those sites, or so that some a building's being taken off so that it can be refurbished and come back as something else, as would be the case, for example, in the old Kellogg site across the road. So that there are, it's a temporary phenomenon, is what I'm saying, and it just happens that there are a few major developments going on at the same time, which has caused this temporary dip. However, we will still achieve our targets for the year, because there has been growth elsewhere, and also some of the appeals have been settled, so we've been able to release some of our appeals provision. So can you remind me what the next question was?
Is there any more contingency being released in the final few weeks?
So there are some contingencies still being held back, particularly in the more volatile demand-led budgets. We do hold back some contingencies for the later months. Although, if you think about those demand-led budgets, if you were to take, for example, a child with complex needs into care at this time of year, we would only be paying for that child for 1 month. So it would actually, the pressure would largely fall on next year. But yes, there are still some contingencies held back that would be released at the end of the year if they're not used in that last 2-month period.
Thank you. Any further questions or comments? Okay. Thank you. And now I think, can I just confirm the recommendations are on page 1 of the report? Are they noted? Thank you. Haven't received any urgent business, so that concludes the meeting. Thank you.